raise the nature with which the judiciary system addresses these crimes, but it is also the kind of work that UNODC, for instance, does with countries and with the World Customs Organization when they support the Container Control Program.
Excellency, Mr. President, and Your Excellency Secretary General.
The first United Nations Environment Assembly held in Kenya. Integrated management of chemicals and waste is one of 16 decisions and resolutions adopted at this inaugural meeting of the Assembly. The 5-day meeting saw 1,200 delegates, including 117 national delegations and 80 ministers, converge on Nairobi to agree common positions that aim to encourage international action on major environmental issues. The union emphasized that the sound management of chemicals and waste are essential and cross-cutting elements of sustainable development and the post-2015 development agenda.
In the Committee of the Whole, we discussed very ambitious decisions that were critical if we want to move the environmental agenda forward. We also approved the program of work and budget for the biennium 2016-2017. In the next 2 years period, it will be a period in which I believe great things can be and must be achieved. As President of the Environment Assembly, together with the Bureau and the Executive Director, we will spare no efforts to intensify our efforts to implement the decisions that you have taken in a timely, efficient, and effective manner. I will also ensure that the key messages, views, opinions, and issues that were raised during our ministerial dialogue will be reflected in the President's summary and the outcome document, and they will be communicated to all stakeholders, including the United Nations system, governments, the private sector, and civil society.
On Sunday, the 21st of September, 2 days to the United Nations Climate Summit, hundreds of thousands of people marched in New York and in over 2,000 other communities around the world in what organizers called the largest climate change demonstration in history. With banners, flags, floats and drums, protesters at the People's Climate March overwhelmed Midtown Manhattan in flocks of vivid color, demanding action ahead of the United Nations Climate Summit. It was an expression of the love for all that climate change threatens and the hope that this world can be saved and a society powered by 100 clean energy can be built. The massive march kicked off at 11:30 a.m. on the ritzy Upper West Side along Central Park in New York before winding its way through the city on a 2-mile route. The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, former US Vice President Al Gore, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, and actors Mark Ruffalo and Leonardo DiCaprio joined thousands of protesters at the march. Protesters chanted, "What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now."
This is very important to me. I have had a good life. I want my daughter to have a good life. I want her to feel she can have children and they'll have a good life. That's why I'm here.
This resilience initiative was also launched.
The world leaders agreed on Tuesday the 23rd, just 2 days after the first rally, to widen the use of renewable energy and raise billions of dollars in aid for developing countries in an effort to increase the prospects for a wide-ranging deal to slow global warming. The one-day summit, hosted by the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, set goals to halt losses of tropical forests by 2030, improve food production, and hike the share of electric vehicles in cities to 30% of the new vehicle sales by 2030.
Never before have so many leaders gathered to commit to action on climate change. I thank every one of you who came to New York with ambition and commitment.
The non-binding initiatives were set by various coalitions of government, multinational companies, cities, financial groups, investors, environmental organizations, and other groups. The targets are meant to help prepare a 200-nation summit in Paris in late 2015 to finalize a deal to slow rising greenhouse gas emissions. Until now, work has been slow, with many countries more focused on improving economic growth and creating jobs. Governments and investors said they will raise more than $200 billion in climate financing by the end of 2015, including $30 billion in green bonds by commercial banks and $100 billion from a group of development banks.
A new coalition of governments, business, finance, multilateral development banks, and civil society leaders announced their commitment to mobilize upwards of $200 billion for financing low-carbon and climate-resilient development.
A surprise pact from the United States and China crushed the idea that climate politics are staid and predictable. The agreement between China and the United States to jointly cut fossil fuel emissions in the coming years got a lot of deserved attention. The agreement between the two countries that don't often agree was an indicator of just how serious a worldwide problem climate change is. The secret deal, months in the making, was closely followed by a $3 billion pledge to the Green Climate Fund by the United States to support climate action in poor countries. Other countries topped the fund up to $9.3 billion during a pledging session in Berlin. December in the world of climate change means just one thing: United Nations negotiations. On the first day, Peru's Environment Minister, who is also COP20 president, called on all delegates to remove their jackets due to air conditioning problems at the Lima venue.
We have raised the need to bring creative and innovative solutions to this negotiation, to this debate. So let me recommend to you a first creative and innovative solution to this warmest atmosphere of this hall. So I would like to invite all of you to take out the jackets to have a Southern Hemisphere COP20 here in Lima.
At a joint news conference, the United Nations climate chief said renewable energy reduces dependence on a volatile oil market.
The fact that oil prices are so unpredictable is exactly one of the main reasons why we must move toward renewable energy, which has a completely predictable cost of zero for fuel.
So let me resume the 10th meeting of...
Diplomats met in Peru for 2 weeks of talks, which concluded in a late-night agreement setting the world on a path towards Paris next year.
So if you agree, it is so decided.
Where a global deal should be signed. With a few extra pledges, including a surprise contribution from Australia, the Green Climate Fund hit its $10 billion target. And during the United Nations climate talks in December, the World Meteorological Organization said the year 2014 is on track to be one of the hottest, if not the hottest, on record. This is largely due to record-high global sea surface temperatures.
Comparing January to October 2014 to earlier years, if November and December maintain the same global temperature anomaly value, the best estimates for 2014, according to this measure, would place it as the warmest year on record.
And if we do nothing, then by the end of the century, you can see the substantial decrease in yields that would take place. And with a growing population and higher incomes, you can imagine food scarcity and food security and the whole issue of starvation and hunger become very large threats.
One of the big indicators of how the climate is changing is in sea surface temperatures anomalies. In the top diagram, we indicate the sea surface temperature anomalies from January to October of 2014, which were about 0.45 degrees Celsius above the 1961 to 1990 average.
Thank you, Claire.
But the head of the United Nations Climate Change Secretariat said the change is clear and the oceans are paying a price for it.
The heat is being absorbed by the oceans. There is no doubt that the ocean continues to warm, and that on a very, very consistent basis. And what it is doing, frankly, is doing us a little favor. They are absorbing the heat that could have gone to the land and paying the price.
The scenarios by a United Nations panel of scientists indicate that the world should get on track to slash emissions to a net zero before 2100.
The first priority that they would have to do with or without money from the North is to spend money on adaptation and loss and damage. There will be very little money or no money at all for mitigation. And I think this reality has to be understood, because you have no choice but to respond to the floods and the crises and the hurricanes and the typhoons.
Developments in 2014 make clear that the impacts of climate change will continue to grow. The struggle to address climate change on the streets and in the negotiating rooms are only going to intensify, and the climate change and other environmental challenges are going to become an ever larger part of political campaigns. As these events unfold, we'll be here to keep track of them all. That's our program for today. Thank you for being a part of it. From all of us here, it's bye for now.